Hi, today I would like to speak about three different aspects of Russo-Ukrainian war. Grand, grand aspect, macro level aspect. Mostly it concerns like a regional development, and finally regional one. I mean, like what's going on directly on the front. Of course, it is not going to be long delivery, but I would try to outline because it would it is interesting for me too to think about this. Uh, so the grand strategy of it, in my opinion, it is that we are witnessing. Of course, from one side, it should be taken as already granted that Russia again took leadership over the rise, like a global rise against the Western dominance. It is clear for everyone. I think it's nothing surprising here, but the surprising, really surprising here is that um, the 80s. The answer is lying on the 80s. Actually, Lenin was once wrote that if you want to understand the current situation, or particularly if you want to understand the why war is appeared, specifically First World War, you need to go and analyze first maybe 2 3 years before this war. So it's logical, but for him, for Lenin, it was clear that the contradictions, geopolitical, economic contradictions, which apogate in this war, were lying before this war. So it wasn't like a logical event. The very war itself. For him, it was only continuation on general strategy or general policy, and some new expression of this of politics. For Marxists, it's definitely the politics and war almost. They, let's say they were in the same box because they were they were pupils of Clausewitz. But anyway, so as I said, the reason of this war in Ukraine is actually from the 80s. Why? Partially 80s, partially from the very reason of appearance of the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union, as one of the main grand strategy of the Soviet Union, was to lead the world revolution. The world revolution, and but at the same time, the concept of world revolution changed, and after they failed to promote the world revolution in the Western Europe, they changed this strategy and orientated own efforts to bring the world revolution uh, to the east, to Asia, to the third world as we know it. So, and maybe one of the main historical missions of the Soviet Union was from one side, of course, it was definitely like that we need to promote communism in these areas, and it has geopolitical and ideological reasons. But why they did it was real, like a deep thinking and discussion inside the Soviet Union. At that time, it was the Soviet Russia in the 20s of the 20th century. They understood that after failed world revolution in the West, we need to go to the East. But at the same time, it had a very practical meaning. So they understood that if they would deprive access of the Western countries or imperialist countries to its colonies, the West would be much weaker, and it would make easier to them to trigger actually revolutions inside the West. So the main strategy was to help to gain independence, political independence, to the non-European nations, and like as I said, deprive them, deprive the West the total control over its colonies, and at the same time, in the 60s and particularly in the 70s, in the West, in the Marxist scientists and in the Soviet scientific cycles was developed the concept of neo-colonialism, which meant actually that even if the third world gained its independence, political independence, he still definitely depending from economic, cultural, financial superiority of the West. And the strategy of the Soviet Union and sometimes even Chinese Communist Party of China, they understood it and tried to help to the third world to gain this financial independence. But the difference was that the China and Soviet Union, they were not the capitalist countries, and they were offering to these countries the alternative economic system completely out of the capitalism. And the new nationalistic governments were not ready for that. So, and the way initially I said about the 80s. So 80s, it's answer to the 2000s. Why? Because in the 80s, the Soviet Union and the Communist China almost disappeared. They didn't in the 80s. Yes, they existed, but they almost disappeared like a challengers. They stopped to be challengers to the capitalist system, to imperialist system, and it's created very difficult situation to the third world, because to the third world was the countries of the third world were balancing between two economic system, geopolitical system, ideological system. So the existence of China, strong or aggressive China, and the aggressive Soviet Union was creating for these states some kind of flexibility, geopolitical flexibility. They were able to maneuver between different blocks. But when Gorbachev came to power and eventually China changed its strategy, we can definitely say that situations changed dramatically for the third world countries, and specifically in terms of their ability to maneuverability. And in the 80s, at the beginning of 80s, appeared a specific school of international relations school in Russia, under leadership. I wouldn't say it's like it was total leadership, but it's appeared some discussion in the Soviet Russia regarding this. They understood that a Russian scientist, particularly Primakov, when he was a young scholar, he understood that something is changing in the world. And this change was based upon the assumption that the capitalism is able to is producing new centers of the power, and these centers of the power were not only in the capitalist world, because traditionally only capitalist world was producing the centers of the power as a hegemon, yes. But they said that the capitalist system within the last decades created new centers of the power in the third world. For example, it was about Singapore, it was about Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, um, uh, Turkey, and some other countries, Iran, and they really grasped the new essence of world history, the direction of world history, and in my opinion, it was some kind of very personal understanding that from one side they understand that the Soviet Union is weakening, from other side it was attempt to save the Soviet Union, but in new geopolitical realities. So the new intellectuals in the Soviet Union, they supported the idea that they need to go to the new centers of power, the capitalist, become more capitalist itself, and at the same time, by the close economic cooperation, support these countries. So it was not Iraq anymore. It was not about I don't know Syria, but it was rather concentration on the real rising economic powers in different regions, in the Middle East, in Far East or Southern Asia, and under such circumstances, they would able to create a new world order, new geopolitical architecture in the world, because according to their estimations, it was definitely clear for them that by the creation of new architecture and these more independent countries, but from the third world, they would be much more independent economically, particularly economically, from the West. So, but at the same time, if new architecture would appear, global architecture would appear, the weaker Soviet Union would survive, because other countries definitely would like to see the existence of the Soviet Union. Why? Because the balance of power, the logic of the balance of power requires the existence of the Soviet Union or Russia. So the Primakov was the guy, maybe he had 40 at the 80s, and he developed this idea. Not only he, a couple different works appeared almost at the same, with the same title, couple books, couple articles. It was, let's say, end of the 70s, but the articles and books were not so clear. But at the first years of the 80s, the idea was, like a more structured than it was before. What I was saying, I mean, idea of this. So, and it was felt everywhere. I mean, the Middle Eastern countries, they were first countries which were feeling that the challenging nature of the Soviet Union disappeared, and it forced them, even sometimes openly call for the Soviet Union to act as it's acted before, but new Soviet leadership really refused to pursue such policy. And eventually, not Soviet Union, but the United States entered to the new world order, unipolar world, exactly by stepping up into the Soviet Union backyard with aggressive act. I mean, it was objectively aggressive act. It was a war, in between 90 and 91. I mean, like the war against Iraq. So it was symbolical and real geopolitical act of the United States that demonstrated who is the boss in the world, and the even official support of of the Soviet Union of American American war against Iraq, it was real completely new architecture, so nobody is defending third world countries, and third world countries are not able to defend themselves. So it was real like a new world order which ended between 2014, and maybe like a finalization of this process was occurred just a couple months ago. So the contradictions between the West and the third world and Russia and China from other side. So we have it like I would say the Bandung Conference in 1955. The principles of the Bandung Conference haven't disappeared. The contradiction geopolitical between the third world and the West, let's say imperialist world and the West and the third world, haven't disappeared. The geopolitical contradiction between China from one side and Russia and the West from other side, they haven't disappeared. So it was some kind of pause. We were facing last 3 decades the pause, which was under hegemony of the West, definitely. But now they are challenging. I mean, like what is it, like a grand explanation? What we are witnessing? It is attempt of the third world. Of course, it's not anymore third world, but I'm using in order to make it more simple, much more simple to understand. The third world from other side, the challengers from other side. I mean China and Russia. They are slowly were preparing conditions to start their counterattack. So it is actually counterattack, counteroffensive operation, like a in the Eurasian scale. So if we would totally go to the concept of like an anaconda, of course it's simplification. So let's imagine that in the 90s, or already in the 90s, we were witnessing how anaconda was like strangling Eurasia. In the 20th century, during the Cold War, the Soviet Union partially managed to go through the different areas of the Eurasia and break this, definitely break this strangulation of Eurasia. With support of China, support of Vietnam, support of independent India, and actions in the Middle East, and even in Eastern Europe. But what we see right now during the last 3 decades. The symbol, if speaking in terms of the symbols, United States with its allies managed to establish quite definite strong control over Eurasia, especially in the Western Eurasia. But the fight is happening for breaking like this, to kill anaconda, which is strangling Eurasia totally. I mean, what this anaconda is created by several pieces, and in the 90s, this anaconda a bit grew up in Central Asia, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and Eastern Europe with Ukraine, Georgia, and Georgia, and of course Georgia and Moldova, yes, and had some hopes for Belarus and some other countries, but now it's definitely that. So it's symbolism. It doesn't mean that I think it like that, but I just trying to explain. And for Russia and China, they would like to rid of several the most important in Iran, of course, several of the most important elements of this symbolism or real geopolitical pressure on them. Just imagine that Russia is rid of, if Russia would achieve own geopolitical goals in Eastern Europe, Iran is achieving its geopolitical goals, even partially. I mean, like if Americans would leave Iraq and Iran would establish control over Iraq, at least over the Shia zone. China is gaining access to the Pacific, stable access by the taking Taiwan. So we would see completely different world order. So especially if Russia would achieve own goals in Eastern Europe, Iran in Iraq, so situation would change definitely and dramatically. But how it could change in terms of, I mean, like as I said, because I was speaking about the grand strategy, yes. So the grand strategy is achieving this goal, which would totally reshape the Eurasian order. And but we need to understand that every country, like a partial, has a different understanding of Western role in the globe. For instance, I don't think any country in the world who is challenging United States or the West in general at large, they would like to see the West as a totally destroyed area. I mean, like a conquered or collapsed. No, I don't think so. But every country who is theoretically could be challenger, for instance, Turkey or India or Saudi Arabia or some other countries, they see the role of, or China or Russia, they see the role of the West in different terms. But they certain, at the very beginning at least, when it started, they are certain that the current architecture, geopolitical and even ideological architecture, must be changed, must forever. So you need to understand that when we take into account any committee in the UN, or when we speak about that, for instance, in the media, yes, when you speak, oh, you are violating international rules. But I don't think that Turkey sees the international rules as a really part of their ethics and as a part of their morale. I don't think, or civilization, because when we speak about international rules, it is something about which is common to everyone. China, not Northern Korea, but normal countries, yes. But what would unify entire world? But until now, entire system of international relations is based upon the concept of domination of the West as a cultural phenomenon, as a cultural, as an ethical, as a moral phenomenon. So it is not secret. Yes, it doesn't matter that I don't support or support it anyway. So I just explaining. It's my like observations, and the feeling of the third world countries is different than the Western. So this is a grand strategy, in my opinion. That's why the rest of the world, non-European world, look all this uh, international international community united against Ukrainian aggression. Yes, Russia is aggressive country, is annexing, occupying Ukrainian territory, but the situation after the Iraq, Yugoslavia, or any after the 30 years of world domination, I mean the Western world domination, total no, it is very hard to convince the third world. This is, I think, the conundrum of entire uh, decade which we are up to. So that it's hard to understand that it's look. For instance, even if we speak about feminism, yes, like as a phenomenon, as a cultural phenomenon, it is Western itself. It is Western phenomenon. So, for instance, it is possible to see the Western woman coming to Africa or Asia and saying about the women's rights. Okay, but just 200 years ago, to the same area were coming the guys uh, uh, with the cross and were saying, "Oh, look, we are delivering to you truth, which was delivered to us from our God." So now they're delivering the different truths about the women rights or other sexual rights. So, but again, the same. So it is missionary concept that West is delivering something right, but your previous world is not right. Again, maybe the West is really right, but it doesn't matter. That the nature of the current history, the logic of the current history is delivering to us or trying to give an answer that situation is changing dramatically, and multipolar world, which was unfortunately I didn't say this at the beginning, that but when Primakov became as a big guy, big political guy, when he was a prime minister or foreign minister, he was trying to create his become implement his philosophy of multipolar world as a center of the power. Even you can hear this from Putin's speech a lot of times, exact term, the center of the powers. It was created by Primakov exactly. So the Primakov is the main father of the terms of center of the powers and the concept of multipolarity. The multipolarity again was delivered in order to save Russia, because they knew about the weaknesses of Russia. They understand that Russia could not lead every time or challenge the West. But anyway, they would challenge the West, but it would be much easier to them to challenge when the world would be spread. The power of the global power would be spread between multiple centers, then it would be divided. So the dichotomy of the global power is suggesting that the Russians are not able to take half of it, or more than half of it. So they understood it, and the multipolar concept is suggesting that they would, in new environment, they would survive, of course, but in current situation, it would be hard to them, exist as a normal power. But we'll see. It is still early to speak. But again, if speak about macro level and local level of this of this big war, but I need maybe if it would be some reaction for that, I would go to next two, next two levels. But again, if to summarize, I would say that we are witnessing global attrition war, which would continue maybe, I don't know, maybe more than a decade, maybe less. So Ukraine is only one front of it, and it's not going to be unified. Definitely, it is not. It's just, and things only will complicate very much within next years. Why? Simply why? Because when it would become obvious that West is becoming weaker, and they would realize it, the most dangerous, when they will realize it, the situation is going to turn into some kind of tectonic change phase, and they would try to play game, the balance of power game. Uh, in my opinion, unfortunately, for the West, it would be too late in order to quickly stabilize the international architecture. But that the Russia, and it is definitely that Russia is started against the West attrition war, and partially the rest of the third world joined to this attrition war. But again, it is not organized, as we can see. I mean, in terms of the bloc, it's not organized. So it is. It is only they all have different goals, but definitely that it should be revised. It should be reassessed, and the new international order should be rebuilt, but in completely new forms. It's like, for instance, just imagine that Turkey has a different understanding as China of world order. For instance, Turkey is satisfied with that the West is existing, but they would like to see even more independent they are right now. Uh, can you imagine, in general, when Turkey, this is like a Turkey, Asian, half European, half Asian country is saying how to behave to Sweden and Finland? It is imaginable how world is changing. I mean, and Stoltenberg saying, "Oh, we need to take into account the concerns of Turkey." Situation is really interesting, and Russia is by the launching the war against Ukraine. This I think it's a very aggressive act and almost genocide against Ukraine. It's triggered new historical stage. It's definitely, and Russia pursue many multifaceted strategy, and as I explain it, why it has a grand dimension, totally grand. I mean, it's not like oh, changing history in terms of just some kind of corrections. No, it has a grand dimension. Of course, if Russia is going to fail, situation would turn to more than unipolar world as we know. Um, like a, it would have eschatological, I would say, consequences. If eschatological, not it doesn't mean, I mean, that it's going to be bad, but in terms of fulfillment of some kind of conspiracy theories, or even as I said, prophecies. Yes, I mean, when some power would gain total hegemony over everything. Of course, it would be called the world is different. World is still has a some uniqueness, but I don't think it would anymore. It would turn to completely new direction. Maybe it's good actually, but we'll see. It's too early to say something. Too early to say something.